Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. My guest today is Tommy Rosen. He is the author of Recovery 2.0, Move Beyond Addiction and Upgrade Your Life. Through more than 20 years of recovery from addiction, noted yoga teacher and founder of Recovery 2.0, Tommy learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work in recovery. From his explorations on the yoga mat and in 12-step rooms, he found a path to sustainable recovery that includes mind-body practices, a profound look at diet, and a more holistic and inclusive perspective on the 12 steps. Welcome, Tommy.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here, Natasha.
I'm delighted that you're here. As I said, I've done a number of shows on addiction and recovery, and I want to start the show by saying the book is brilliant. The book, I mean, if you have any questions, not about any substance abuse or anything, just kind of addictive patterns in life, it's rich with information. So I'm thrilled that I get to interview you.
Thank you.
So let's start with defining addiction.
I'm working with a broad definition of addiction.
Yes.
I like people to, in their mind, to go beyond just the simple drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
So in that expansive view, the definition I have is any behavior you continue to do despite the fact that it brings negative consequences into your life. Any behavior.
And that covers the span of, talk to me about the different kinds of addiction.
Sure. The ones that we're most familiar with are the ones that we can see clearly. You know, drugs and alcohol obviously come to mind. I write and I speak a lot about the big six. So drugs, alcohol, food addiction is next. With food addiction, you're dealing with emotional eating, binge eating, the eating disorders such as bulimia and anorexia, challenges that we have in our relationship with food. Next, you have the people addictions, sex addiction, codependency, so relationship disorders. After that, you have the money addictions, so shopping, being constantly in a state of debt, or gambling. And then, so there used to be just the big five, but now we have the big six. And the sixth is technology, of course. So all the ways we use technology to actually avoid our life or avoid this present moment. So those are the big six. Beyond the big six, we have the four aggravations. The four aggravations are negative thinking, self-doubt, procrastination, and resentment. People often challenge me, Tommy, those are not addiction. I don't crave negative thinking. I certainly don't crave procrastination or resentment or self-doubt. And I say, well, that's true. You don't crave those things, but it still fits my definition of addiction. These are behaviors that you're continuing, despite the fact that they bring a negative consequence into your life. So right there, we can greatly expand our perspective of addiction.
Yeah, and you know, as I'm going to do, as I said to you before, I'm going to do this in little sound bites and jump from point to point because there's so much I could ask you. And I just want to kind of whet people's appetites. And there's a lot of wisdom in these little snippets. But you talk about codependency, and you said it's one of the most painful forms of addiction. Codependency is the disease of the lost self. It compels us to look outside ourselves to another person for fulfillment. It is the most common addiction and often is there beneath the other addictions. I think that almost says it all.
It pretty much sums it up that before, if you speak to a drug addict, an ex-drug addict, an alcoholic who's in recovery, and you say to them, which came first? Relationship troubles or drugs and alcohol? And every time it's going to be, well, of course, as children growing up, difficult, challenging family dynamics, or even just a relationship with oneself, very challenged growing up. The relationship disorders were there first. So why this is so very important is if you're in recovery from, for example, drug addiction or alcoholism, once the drugs and alcohol are gone from your life and your body starts to recover, your mind starts to recover, you start thinking more clearly, guess what's there?
All the stuff that you began with.
Yeah, the stuff you began with, the stuff that was there when you reached out to drugs and alcohol to solve the discomfort of those feelings, or the feeling of being separate from or disconnected from, or I don't belong, I don't know how I belong. And the disease of the lost self says it all. I don't know who I am, where I am, or how I can figure that problem out. So I'm always looking to someone else or something else to solve that problem.
You know, it occurs to me that that's kind of the human condition, no matter where you go, that there is this longing, this kind of, I don't care how happy you are or how tra-la your childhood may have been, and there are very few of those, it's this sense of not quite enough, and where do I belong? And then all the other stuff follows it, but it's almost like, it's like the steamroller that, you know, how do you stop it? Because right now, technology, it's, as you use the phrase of taking yourself away from the moment, from yourself. So again, it's like, where do we start? So you say, you know, after you've, and you know, first of all, that's no small thing to stop your addictions, your physical addictions, but then you're left with you. Then what happens?
Yes. Well, that's the good news. It may not seem like good news at first, because most people are not used to spending time with themselves. I don't just mean being alone. I mean literally sitting still, being quiet, contemplative, and starting to experience the feeling of actually being with yourself. And of course, at first, after a lifetime of avoiding that, that might be uncomfortable for people. But the more that you do that, the more you realize the actual solution. The more you get the thing that you were always searching for in the first place, which was always right here inside. But for whatever reason, you either were not directed to turn your gaze inside and to build that relationship, or you were frightened to and you didn't want to look. And you began this habit of avoiding yourself by any means necessary, really. It doesn't really matter what the addiction is. That process of avoiding yourself leads to all of that pain and all of that discomfort. The only way it stops is you have to stop. So you said, where do we start? We start by stopping. We start by, excuse the French, but putting our ass down on a cushion and sitting still, closing our eyes maybe, taking a few deep breaths, and seeing what is there without reacting to it in any way. Just simply seeing what is there and beginning to develop the most important relationship of your life.
You know, there's so many things in there, and I think it's one of the things that you talk about is that there's no one way to do this journey, and I want to get to like 12-step programs and things like that. But what I really want to, what I get from this is a journey, a process, as the saying goes, not a sudden landing. So you may sit for 3 minutes and find it extraordinarily uncomfortable, and you leap up and say, okay, I'm not going to do any more of that, and let me see what else I can do, but kind of continuing that process. And then maybe it goes to 4 minutes, or maybe there's some other access to what you're talking about, is getting to ourselves.
Yes. Well, imagine you've been in a house and the lights have been off for the whole time, maybe years, decades. You never clean the house. And then all of a sudden, you turn the light switch on. And you look around and you think to yourself, my God, it's filthy in here. Look at this squalor. I've been living in this. And it's a little bit like that when you first start to meditate. You turn the lights on and you start to watch your mind. And your mind, you realize, oh my God, I can't stop thinking. Not only can't I stop thinking, but I don't necessarily like what I'm thinking about. So at first it's that way. But hopefully with the guidance of a wise teacher and a community of support, and this is so important,
Yeah.
someone will tell you, hey, it's supposed to be that way. You don't need to worry about that. That's going to change over time. First, you're supposed to experience the feeling of just watching how busy your mind is. And just by watching, you'll start to realize, my goodness, some very large percentage of the thoughts that come into my mind are actually not useful.
Yeah.
And some of them are actually destructive. Wow. I don't have to do anything about that thinking. It's just happening. Well, very quickly, there's this moment of freedom that takes place there. Wow, you're like, wow, I can take a vacation from having to do something about all this thinking. And that's where it begins.
So that's the meditation part. And you know, it's again, we think that our thoughts are real. And our identity is collapsed in with that. And as you talk about meditation, it's just like, well, you're noticing that the thoughts are just kind of a traveling sideshow, you know, and they're moving on and they're repetitive and what else. But I think what I hear also in here is it's practicing not judging it, just observing it. So I want to jump into 12-step programs because, you know, you've done, and you talk about in your book, access to this is not just like one and done, that you want to use all the tools that are valuable. And one of them was a 12-step program. And very often people go, 12-step program, that means, and then they have all the meanings attached to it. So say a little bit about that.
What we all want is freedom. How can we have it? We need a teaching. Everybody, anyone in a human body needs a teaching to follow. The teaching that you follow will lead you where that particular teaching goes. If it's a true teaching, it'll lead to the truth. An immutable, unchangeable truth. Any religious path, in its core, I'm just talking about the doctrine, the core philosophy, the core statement of the religion, has truth in it. It's true for all religious paths. It's true for all spiritual paths. Otherwise, it's not true religion. It's not true spirituality. All paths lead to the truth, or they're not paths at all. They're just painful detours. Now, with the 12 steps, it's no different. There's a doctrine. The 12 steps, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you want to go to the original document, you can look in there and you can see language. You can hear stories, read about the condition of alcoholism. You can apply that to all other addictions as well. In there is truth. Does that mean that every word ever spoken in there is truth? Not necessarily. It's truth as it reveals itself to you. The problem that people have with the 12 steps is they don't understand what that truth is or how to access it. Because you're at the mercy of your teacher. If you don't know anything about the 12 steps and you just have ideas about it, well, that's called contempt prior to investigation. You want to investigate. So then you can speak from your own experience. The way you investigate is with a teacher, what they refer to as a sponsor. So you have a sponsor. That sponsor's experience will become influential in your path into that particular version of the truth. The 12 steps are legitimate as a source of truth. That's why so many people have recovered from them. And very often, people have been guided through them in ways that may not ultimately have led to the truth. And maybe they needed something more or something different.
Right.
And the most important thing about the 12 steps that everybody must understand, just like any religious or spiritual path, it's just the beginning. You have the spiritual path, and now you must go out and you must live your life. Now, last I checked, all of us were in a body. It has needs. It needs to be detoxed on a regular basis. It needs to be fed and nourished. We need to be able to eliminate that which is no longer necessary. All those things happen in the physical body, but none of those things are addressed by the 12 steps.
Right.
It's just simply not the focus of that work.
Right.
So the 12 steps are the first step. You get sober, you build a foundation of recovery, because we know that we can't get to the truth if we continue to behave with drugs and alcohol and other addictive behaviors. Those lead us away from the truth, ultimately.
Right.
So you build your foundation of recovery. The 12 steps can help with that. And while you're building that, and for years and years and years to come, life will happen, and you now get to jump off like a springboard. You can go into the path of yoga, the path of meditation, path of nutrition and diet, the path of optimal living. So the 12 steps gave you a foundation from which you could live the rest of your life.
Right.
And that's just one path. There are infinite ways to get sober. There are infinite ways to learn and to grow as a human being.
You know, it's really great. And one of the things you say in the book is don't let the 12 steps become your life. Get a life because of the 12 steps. So as you talk about, it's a launching point. One of the things that you talked about is the idea of seeing the possibility of full recovery. You say leave some space for the possibility of full recovery from addiction. Now, some of the people that I've talked to who have been, who are recovering addicts, who were so enveloped and consumed with the addiction that, you know, someone who had to be brought back with Narcan 3 or 4 different times, facing death, facing just like the worst possible things you can imagine. And one of the things that they said was, did they, you know, what did they think about becoming a non-addict or recovering? And what was common was they didn't even see it as a possibility.
That's a big part of the reason why I wrote that into the book. You see, when I say leave possibility in your mind for a full recovery, that doesn't mean that you can now go out and drink, that you can now go out and use drugs, that you can act out in addictive ways without your life imploding.
Right.
It means that you have grown into a new consciousness where you no longer desire those things because you recognize they could only pull you back down to a previous level of consciousness. That's called relapse. So you see, you're setting yourself free each day. People say to me, Tommy, you've been sober now almost 28 years. Don't you think you could have a glass of wine? Classic question, comes all the time. Don't you think you could smoke a joint? Don't you want to jump on the bandwagon of all this legalized marijuana in the United States and Canada, blah, blah, blah? I'm like, you're asking the wrong question. Question is, why would I want to put a veil over my awareness? Why would I want to change my consciousness in a way that demotes my well-being? Why would I want to intoxicate this body, even the slightest bit? I can't begin to get my mind around what a drink or any drug could do to bring something positive to my life. I don't worry about it. I don't think about it. It's just simply not there's no charge for me around those substances anymore. I have recovered from it. That doesn't mean that I can now go out and have a glass of wine and everything's just going to be fine with me. You know what will happen? My mind will be activated and it will start to think about one concept and one concept only, and that concept is more.
Wow.
Maybe you could do this again. And I don't need to activate my mind in that way. That would be a sincere fall for me into a previous consciousness that I don't desire to visit ever again.
You know, it's interesting. I lived at a yoga center in India years ago, and one of the things I remember the teacher talking about is we have all these unburned seeds in us, you know, until enlightenment. And what you're talking about is it's not part of your everyday life, but it is an unburned seed. And if you activated it and kind of fertilized it, whatever, it could get activated. And why would you do that?
Well, it's one way to look at this is think about the person who's not, quote, an addict.
Mm-hmm.
So many people I know, they come home and their manner of unwinding, relaxing is to have a couple of drinks. It changes the way they feel. They like the feeling of it.
Right.
Nothing wrong with that. There's no judgment about it in any way, shape, or form for them. For me, whether I was an addict or not, to make that choice would run counter to my desire to learn and to grow, to continually evolve, to look at my feeling. Whereas to smoke a joint or have a glass of wine or a couple of drinks every night, that's not me looking at my feeling.
It kind of interrupts it.
It's a decision to interrupt how I am, and I lose the present moment. And it's the most precious thing that I will ever have in my life. I would not give it up for anything, whether I was an addict or not.
So I have a question, because you talk about the frequency of addiction, and then you say consciousness, and you're talking about elevating your consciousness to another level. Consciousness is contagious. We are susceptible to our surroundings and the vibration of the people we spend time with. So that kind of falls into the people, places, and things, and being conscious of those choices we make. So say a little about the vibration of.
Think of it like listening to a radio station. Literally. Mm-hmm. The radio station is turned to the addiction channel. And on the addiction channel, all kinds of addictive thoughts, negative thinking, self-doubt, all the 4 aggravations, they're happening. You're in this force field of addiction. You're stuck there as long as that radio station is there. You're on the frequency of addiction. So you might get better in the sense of releasing some of the grosser addictions like drugs and alcohol. But like I had to find out, I was still in the frequency of addiction. How do I know that? Because after drugs and alcohol were gone, it was codependency, sex, cigarettes, gambling. Addiction was still very, very much alive in the mind-body system. The radio was still tuned. The radio was still tuned to the frequency of addiction. Now, change the radio station. Let's tune it to the frequency of, we'll call it recovery, but let's call it the frequency of connection. How do you change the station? You have to do certain things. You have to be around certain kinds of people. You have to change the routines of your life so that the radio station changes and stays changed. Because of course, as we know, in early recovery, there's still this vacillation. You might have changed the radio station for a moment, but you're sort of drawn back to the frequency of addiction once again. So there's certain things that we need to do. When do we do them? Every day. Because we need to maintain the vigilance towards a new level of consciousness, a new radio station, a new frequency for ourselves. Things like going to meetings, 12-step meetings, for example, or any meeting where people are getting together in the name of recovering from addiction. Therapy is wonderful. Connecting with yoga teachers, meditation teachers, nutrition, music, art, song, dance, nature, really connecting with people you love. And lo and behold, you do all these things, and all of a sudden, you find yourself after a period of weeks or months or years, and you find yourself at a new radio station. Now, the radio, this whole body-mind system, is attuned to the frequency of recovery, the frequency of connection, the frequency of love. It doesn't mean you will not have difficult days. It means you will get to experience your difficult days. You will get to learn from them. You'll get to move through them. And the fears that used to dominate you and the thinking that used to dominate you will ease up. You'll be on the path towards ease, away from dis-ease.
Wow. Well, that kind of says it all, and it's so powerful. And I think one of the things that I really wanted to bring out, and that your book is all about, is it's about body, mind, spirit. It's about taking care of the entire package. And one of the things that you talked about, and I love, is, and we're almost out of time, but before I start with that sentence, I just, again, want to encourage people to pick up the book. We all have addictions, whether I have an addiction to caffeine, I have an addiction to staying up late, whatever. Is it terrible? No, but is it impacting my life? It's worth exploring. So this book kind of is very embracing and encompassing and thoughtful and thought-provoking. So I encourage everybody to pick it up. But one of the things you say is inside your body is a pharmacy that is open 24 hours a day. The drugs you are really looking for are all right there within you. Everything is experienced through the body.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up in terms of my work in the world.
Yeah.
Is I am trying to inspire people to work with the internal pharmacy, which is your endocrine system,
yeah,
your hormonal system, your chemical system, rather than to reach outside in addictive ways. Or with addictive substances.
Yes, and I think the last thing I want to say is we keep going back to the empty well, and then we're dissatisfied. Oh, let me try that well again, and then we come back to dissatisfaction. So it's kind of what you're talking about is simply access to being happy.
That's all. We've just been looking in the wrong places.
Yes, yes.
We need an upgrade.
Tommy, we're at the end of our time. I can't believe it went by so quickly. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. Thank you for your book. Thank you for the work that you do. I invite everybody to tune in.
Thank you so much. Can I just simply send people to a website?
Absolutely.
Our membership, our global membership, exists at r20.com. That's the letter R for recovery, r20.com.
And that's also appearing on the screen and in the credits, so it gives people an opportunity to definitely reach out. Tommy, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, Natasha.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.